Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. And Cathy, brilliant to have you here from the other side of the world. And to start with, would you please introduce yourself and tell everybody about the great work that you do?
Thanks very much, Alan. It's a pleasure to be here today. Tonight for me, the morning for you. I'm Cathy Sheppard and I'm from BSI People Skills in New Zealand. So I'm really on the other side of the world from you. We are all about culture because people are the most important thing in the world. And when you have an amazing culture in an organization, it changes everything for the people within that organization and for the business itself. So that's what we're all about, is about making cultures amazing in organizations so that you have empowered people, empowered leaders, empowered teams, and everybody's lives are better. So that's the sort of work that we do. We run awards and we do leadership development, we do team development and all of that wonderful stuff. And we basically change lives. So that's exactly what we do. If people want to get hold of me, I'm Cathy Sheppard on LinkedIn, or you can email Cathy with a C at bsipeopleskills.co.nz. And I'm very happy to get to know you and to be able to help in any way that I can.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Cathy. And I've got a follow-up question before we get into the values jam, because you've talked about people being the most important thing in the world, and in organizations, a lot of the time we hear the words that people are our greatest asset. And so you're dealing with a lot of stuff where there's a risk that it's cliched. And I'm really
Yes.
curious about how you overcome that challenge and how you take
Mm.
a more practical approach.
Mm. It's about getting the people within that organization getting to know themselves and each other so that they can bring their whole selves, if you like, to the organization and be real, not be not have to put on a mask, to be able to come and to be able to bring their strengths and so on. And so we use various tools like Everything Disc as a profiling tool to be able to help build communication, bring their strengths and communicate with each other in the way that's going to work for each other. And another tool that we use, which I totally love, is the emotional culture deck. And this is a tool that enables us to understand more about our emotions. So to be able to understand the emotions that we desire and the emotions that we don't want to feel as well. And when we name those emotions, we can tame them and we can be vulnerable with each other, but it helps us to be able to move through those emotions so that we can live better lives and not be stuck in trying to suppress all of these emotions that we don't want to feel.
Yeah.
So
The-
yeah,
the-
all of that helps to make it real with the people within that organization and helping them to understand more about themselves and each other.
yeah.
Hmm.
And today we're going to be having a values jam, but you've mentioned the emotional culture deck. Well, is that created by a guy in New Zealand? I think it is, isn't it?
It
So,
is, and it's global now, and it's being translated in multiple different languages. The amazing Jeremy Dean in Wellington, and yeah, it's just amazing, so powerful. Mm.
okay, so people watching this, if they want to look it up, it's emotional. Show us the card deck again. There you go.
It's the
Emotional culture deck and Jeremy Dean. If you, yeah, I remember. The reason I remember is because I did a project with a company in Australia, and
mm,
um, it was a 31 practices project, which is a tool that I use to translate values into practical day-to-day behavior. And
yes.
I know that they had had some dealings with Jeremy previously. So the more good work and tools in this space, the better. That's the way I think.
Absolutely, I totally agree.
All right, so let's get down to business.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, so I'm going to tip the cards
Yes,
out.
values is such a core part of organizations as well. You know, when you're talking about creating those amazing organizations, they have to be able to know what their core values are and to be able to work on those together.
Yeah, that's
Mm.
right. Because and especially so in another book, The Values Economy, what that talks about is how the landscape has fundamentally changed now.
Yes.
And it talks about how there are th three. There are maybe more things that have an impact, but I've identified three key drivers. The first is that people are making choices on a different basis than before. So it used to be very rational,
Mhm.
whereas now it's very emotional. And the flip is actually incredible because it's moved from something like 70% rational basis to an 80% emotional basis. So it's really turned on its head over around about 20 years. So
Mm.
choice is the first one. Then communication is another, which is all to do with the internet and social media. So, we can share our thoughts and feelings with millions of people all over the world in a heartbeat. So that's the second one. And the third one is control. And it
Mhm.
used to be that organizations owned their brand. So an
Mhm.
organization like yours, the senior guys would come up with what you wanted to be seen as and then pump it out there into the world. Whereas now, the brand is actually co-owned by all of the stakeholder groups because we don't believe the official messaging as much as we believe what other people tell us. So those three C's combine, and I say that they're the C to the power of three, which creates what I call the values economy. And that's why values are more important now than they've ever been before.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so how many piles would you like me to make in front of me?
Three piles, because you've got three there. So we've been talking about threes.
Okay, and so pile one is on my left and pile three is on my right. So
Take,
which number
take
pile?
pile number two,
Number two. Okay. And
and
we've
I
got
take
three, nine,
ninth card.
ninth card. Okay. How did you know I've got more than eight?
I didn't. I didn't. But I went three squares.
Okay, so here we go. What do you think of this?
Security. Interesting. Okay. Wow.
Security. Now, interesting is always an interesting word, isn't it? It's like, interesting. So what does security mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Security. It's got an idea of safety in it. It's got an idea of uh, having enough to have choices, I think, as well as part of that security. It's got an element of physical, your physical requirements, but also those emotional requirements, your family security, um, the fact that you're not going to be attacked by other people as well, I think comes into it. So, you've got your day-to-day life security, job security, family security, security amongst your friends, security of information. There are so many different layers of that word.
Well,
Mm.
what a great start. You covered loads of ground already, right? And a couple of things that I'd add that you've not mentioned, it makes me think of um, either no or minimal risk and danger when I think about
Mhm.
security. Um, and also the term comfort blanket came. I can't remember exactly what that was in response to what you said. But oh yeah, it was when you have enough.
Mm.
And that made me think of, it's when you feel like certain things are dealt with and you're not at risk, and so you're able then to do things that perhaps you wouldn't have done if those things hadn't been in place. Okay, and then what about if we tap into the more creative side of our brains and, when you think of the word security, what images come to mind, what sounds come to mind, and what feelings come to mind?
The first images that came into mind were handcuffs, actually, which is a really a really dodgy image to have for security, but that was the first image that came to mind. Um, Comfort. I love your idea of that security blanket, the duvet, on the bed and having that. Hugs, cuddles, those sorts of things as well come to mind when thinking of security. Friendship, job security. Those are the images that come to mind. Being able to know that you've got a job, being able to go to work and do your job knowing that that the company is safe, that which is very, very topical in New Zealand with so many thousands of people losing their jobs over here at the moment. So
Okay.
misuse very dodgy.
And for me,
Mm.
padlock comes to mind. So not quite your handcuffs, but a padlock is in a similar sort of vein, I guess. Um, Sounds, I've got an alarm going off. So that's security when it's kind of at risk of being breached, I suppose. And then feelings, you mentioned the different component parts of security. So you talked about physical, emotional, social, job, family. I've added in there spiritual. But when I'm thinking about feelings, I kind of feel that all of those are wrapped up to provide psychological safety.
Yes.
Because when you're in that place and you feel that sense of security again, it's that kind of emboldening foundation from which you can move forward more easily.
Mm.
Um, any other thoughts on that?
No, that's such a good way of describing it, actually, that psychological safety, giving you the power, because I talk about empowerment a lot, and that's exactly what you've just described. When you have got that security, when you've got that solid base to be able to work from, then you have the ability to do all sorts of things because you've got that safety. Yeah, I
And you
really
know
like
that you're reminding me of a lot of my experience in the corporate environment. And you've just mentioned the word empowerment again. People, I think there's a perception of some that empowerment is like this, I don't know, silver bullet that can just be dished out and everything will be fine. But actually, if you don't implement empowerment, maybe with security first, it can go badly wrong.
it.
Can you relate to that?
Absolutely. I'm thinking what you're bringing to mind there is Maslow's hierarchy of needs for me. And if you don't have the basics of life, there's no security there. And how can you empower somebody to be able to go and do, whatever when they're struggling to have their basic needs met, when they security of housing, security of food, right? These are all things that are really, really vital in order for people to be able to have the strength to be able to go beyond themselves, beyond that mere survival thing,
Yeah.
and find that extra power to make a difference, to do
Mm.
things that they want to do.
And is there a stretch? I don't want to kind of, make up the connection just because we're talking about security, but what's come to mind is the connection potentially with confidence.
Mhm.
Because if I'm thinking about that empowerment in the workplace, and suddenly the senior people say, you can decide. And it's like, oh, some people might be like that. Some people might just bowl in and make mistakes. But it feels like there's something about that empowering process involving security because confidence is an important part of that on that journey.
Mm, mm. And I think you've got to build that level of trust between people because it comes back down to security of relationships and so on. And so if you've got a group of people that have been behaving in a particular way, which hasn't necessarily made you feel safe and secure, and then all of a sudden it's like they've had this personality transplant and sudden saying, go and do and be and all of this sort of stuff, you'd be like, what's going on here? And
Yeah,
it wouldn't make you feel secure.
yeah,
Really scared of, well, you could be very scared of, well, what do they actually want me to do? Am I likely to get my knuckles wrapped if I step out of line here? So I think that there's a process in terms of developing that security for people. If things, I'm thinking of toxic workplaces and so on, which make people feel very insecure. And you cannot wave a magic wand over a toxic workplace and have everything all of a sudden the next day being beautiful. And that's where those tools and things come into play of actually helping people to understand that there are different types of people and different personalities. And this is some of the stuff that is making people feel insecure because of the damaged relationships and so on. Or you've had an environment where emotions haven't been accepted in the workplace. You come to work and you do your job and so on. And then when people start using, for example, the emotional culture deck, or starting to ask people about how they feel, it can make people feel quite insecure. What will people do with this information? Is it going to be used against me if I'm having a hard day? Or, yeah, those sorts
Yeah,
of.
so I think what you're opening up there is that whole space around management of people is hugely complex. Um, and just like you've described, when certain behaviors happen in the workplace, that's not all that is judged, because people kind of read behind the behaviors, sometimes accurately, sometimes not. But in a way, that doesn't matter because they're reading into it something else, and that needs to be dealt with. I don't know whether you've come across it, maybe you have. I use the term the leadership shadow. Does that ring a bell?
It's not a familiar one to me. I
Okay.
love conversations like this because I'm always learning new things. So the leadership shadow, tell me more.
Well, it's not kind of a complex psychological model or anything like that. It's just very simple and says that the more senior you are, the longer the shadow you cast as a leader
Mhm.
through your behavior. And that can be a positive shadow or a negative shadow. Um, and I sometimes use the example of imagine that we're new employees in, let's say, a hospital group,
Mm.
and we go to induction and we hear that they're values led, and we
Mhm.
hear that one of their values is excellence,
Mhm.
and we hear that they use the 31 practices approach, and today is all about meticulous attention to cleanliness and tidiness. And we're
Mhm.
sat there and we talk at the break and we say, this company's great, isn't it? But really bringing our values to life. And then it's lunch break. And so we're directed down a corridor. And in the opposite direction, there's a small group of people coming, and it's the CEO of the company who's visiting our site. And between our group and their group, there's a paper cup on the floor. And they arrive at it first. And she, the CEO, steps over it and carries on walking towards us. So you say to me, did you see that? And what we've just heard is it doesn't seem to apply. And we go into the employee restaurant and some people say, how's induction? And we tell them that story and it goes around like wildfire. But if you rewind and play that again, and now the CEO picks up the cup and either puts it in a bin or gives it to a colleague, then we tell the story in that light and it goes around like wildfire. So that's just a practical demonstration of how the leadership shadow can work. And although it's not very complicated and it's, not very deep, I think it's very helpful in understanding the importance of the tiniest behaviors of senior leaders.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right. It is our behaviors that speak louder than our words. And
So let's play with that then. Can you think of a time when you've witnessed senior leader behavior that does not encourage security?
where do I start?
Without naming names or anything, the more
I
practical
would
the
never name,
example, the
I
better.
would never names. A culture that talks about getting the dickhead off the bus, a culture that is uh, the senior person within that company never greets anybody, walks in and uh, almost looks down on any employee that is not somebody that is their friend, uh, uh, a leader that is nepotistic, that employs people or promotes people without the qualifications that they need to do their jobs, but because of the old boys network, or because they were a family member, a wider family member, or a friend, and that has incredibly damaging results in terms of culture. And the business may the business may be very successful on paper, but you look at things like staff turnover, they can make a profit. You look at staff turnover, you look at impact on people that have been spat out by that organisation, and there's a lot of damage from that.
Yeah, so you've taken me back to I don't know if you're aware, but my first career was in commercial hospitality management. So I ended up running five-star hotels, conference centers, and that sort of thing. And I got a new job. It was managing director of a five-star hotel and country club. Beautiful place, 200-acre estate, championship golf course, beauty spa, all the works. And because it was in a large estate, the car parking was quite some distance away from the main building, although there was a small area at the front of the building where there was room for some vehicles, but it was usually used as a drop-off point. So on my first day at work, I didn't know where to park. And so I went to the front of the hotel and got out and asked where I needed to park the car. And the guy said, "Oh, we'll park the car for you." So I said, "You don't need to do that. Yes, for our guests, but you don't need to do that for me. Can you just point me in the right direction?" So I went and parked the car, came back, and I said, I'm curious why you offered to do that for me." And he said, "Well, the way that it worked with your predecessor was that he would arrive, get out of his car, leave the door open, walk through reception, and throw the keys to be caught by somebody on his way to his office." And it was like alarm bells, ding-a-ling-a-ling. And I found out subsequently that there was a real kind of fear, no security whatsoever in the organization and there was a lot going wrong. But the attitude of senior leaders was, whose fault was it? Find them, hunt them down, and deal with them. It was brilliant opportunity to do things better.
Absolutely. I mean, you can't really go worse, can you?
That's right. Always look for those places. Now, sorry, go
You
on.
know, the way that people greet people within an organization is a really interesting one, and I've worked in different countries and including Bangladesh. And this is a story from some of the work that I did in Bangladesh, because, there are very, very big companies there, and doing soft skills training and so on over there. One of the biggest things that is so simple is for a manager, when they arrive, to actually greet people on their way into work, right? Which is, smile and say hello. Because so many of them have never had this sort of training before, right? And so, you put on this persona of I'm the leader and therefore I walk to my office and so on. And this has been a huge change for those people that have done that training. The result with their teams, the result with the response to people, the willingness, the lack of fear, the increased security in the environment has been huge, just from that simple way that you greet people in the morning.
Oh, yeah, I'm with you 100%, Kathy. I remember going to a course at Ashridge Management College, which is a pretty well-regarded college in the UK. And this course encouraged everybody to identify a personal signature. So
Mm-hmm.
something that you did that was about you being different from other people. And I had long admired the vibe that you get in a really good kitchen where chefs work together to create something absolutely amazing. And I'd worked in a number of hotels, and something that seemed common was that chefs would shake hands first thing in the morning. And so I used that, and that became my signature. And so when I saw people for the first day, our employees in the hotel, I would shake their hand. And at the beginning, I explained to people that I was going to be doing this because I understood that some people would be a bit freaked out, what's happened to. So I explained what I've just said to you. And then just to finish the story, I remember getting a confirmation of a big residential conference from IBM. And when I asked the lady why she chose us rather than other hotels, she said when I showed her around, she noticed how I was shaking hands with various people on the walk round. And she said that told me that this was the right place. So it's so powerful, like you say. Which other countries have you worked in?
I've lived and worked in Japan. I've lived there for 7 years, and that's been a very, very big part of my life. I've also worked in person in Bangladesh, Nepal, India, and Malaysia.
Wow. So I'm very curious about Japanese culture. So I've got a question which how are there differences between approach to security in Japan and say more typically Western oriented countries? And if so, what do those differences look like?
What a fascinating question. Are there differences to security? Everything about Japan is different. Are there differences to security?
While you're thinking, oh well, go on.
Now, one of the things that I love about Japanese society is the way that I've seen parents with their children. And I'm thinking of mothers at the park and or on the train or wherever, and the social coaching that goes on right from when the children are really, really little. So, in New Zealand, parents would take children to the park. The parents would sit down on a park bench or something like that, have a chat with somebody, and the children would go off and they'd be yelling at the children about, don't do that or whatever, often. I am generalizing here. Whereas over in Japan, when you go to the park, you see the parents with their children, the mother, there, and they're going around with the child and they're talking with the child about, what this child is doing, and, let that child have a turn, or, so that they're coaching right from this really young age about this knowledge of what other people are doing and where they are and what you might need to do in order to enable that child or that person's personal space, which I think then creates a greater social security, if you like, in terms of safety of relationships. You know that you're not going to be bashed into. There's a respect as a core value within Japanese society. There is a respect for people. There's a respect for the environment. There's a respect for respect. It's like the core value. I don't know whether there's an amazing book, and I'm just trying to think about what it is, but it talks about the core values of different countries.
Oh, does it?
And it's about 150 different countries that is mentioned in this book, and it identifies the core value of each of these different countries. And respect is Japan's number one core value.
Is this the Values Compass by Mandeep
Yes,
Rai?
yes, 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 yes,
Okay.
yes, yes. It's the one. It's an amazing book. So, and fascinating in that.
Yeah.
I think that
So,
is one of the things that feeds into the security. I'm also thinking of the way that children are trained from a young age. And when we were living there, we had 3 children there, so aged 5, 3, and 1 when we first went. And my oldest son, he started school at 6, and one of the first things that he was asked to do was to, go and play with his friend after school. And so the children, by the way, all walk to school. They're picked up by the other children. They walk to primary school and they walk home again. And children are finishing at different times, so they're walking home often on their own. But that's life. It's secure. There's that security to be able to walk home. And so off he went to go and play with his friend. And so when he came back home, I said to him, what did you do this afternoon? And he talked about being rusuban, which means that we were in charge, because her mother had gone off to the shops and had left them in charge. 2 6-year-olds in charge of the house for, I don't know how long she was away. Could have been an hour, could have been 3/4 of an hour, but they were in charge. And they were totally fine about this. Now, coming from a New Zealand environment, that is not seen as secure.
yeah,
You are seen as being an incredibly irresponsible parent,
yeah,
and you're likely to have the police on you, and your children could be yeah, there could be greater consequences there. But there's a difference. There's this trust, right? The empowerment of the children that you train them to be able to do this. There's this expectation that you know how to behave, that you know how to look after yourself, the house, and so on, as opposed to this idea of being vulnerable and incapable because you are 6 years old, right? And they were Lusuban, and they were great. They had a great time, and everybody was fine.
And earlier we were talking about how providing the security ahead of empowerment gives people confidence. I think we're talking about flipping this now, where if you show how confident you are in somebody's ability, then they will respond accordingly rather than you kind of doubting them. So maybe that's something else about empowerment where you're you're trusting people to do the right thing. You're guiding them when they don't. You're recognizing people when they do, and that building again. Or so it's a confidence builds confidence, I guess. That's the kind of feel. So in Japan, I've got two examples relating to security. One is I remember going from Tokyo around about an hour away. I don't even remember the name of the place on a train and looking around and being totally conscious that I was the only non-Japanese person on the train, which, I'm in London, and so it's such a cosmopolitan place. I think that was the first time I'd ever felt like that. Um, and I was also highly aware that because it's not even the same alphabet, that you're totally out of your comfort zone as far as directions and all the rest of it is concerned. But I never once felt like I wasn't safe or secure. And maybe that was naive, but that was how it felt. Um, and then the other one, I lost my wallet, and I had to go to the police station to report it. And I just got the sense that there was a zero tolerance to theft, for instance. The guys that I was speaking to seemed genuinely distraught that I had experienced this and in their patch kind of thing. So again, that's this deep embedding of culture rather than focusing on the surface level behavior that we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. And your wallet being, I hope that you got your wallet back.
No, I didn't.
Oh, you didn't. Okay, that's unusual, I think. My sister, she was catching the plane back to London. She'd come to visit us when we were in Japan, and she left her coat on the back of the toilet door in the airport. And she got it flown to England because she was able to talk to the air people and saying, I've left my jacket on my coat on the back of the door in the toilet. And they actually sent it to her. So this is the sorts of things that can happen. Yeah, I totally agree that it's a very, very safe and secure country.
How refreshing to hear something like that.
I've
And
felt unsafe at all.
so, can I ask what made you move away from Japan? Because just listening to you sounds like you've got very fond memories of that.
I do. I was born in Japan. I lived there till
Oh,
I was 3. And then I went back as an exchange student. So I was there for a year and I was living in an area where there were no foreigners. And I was going to a school where they didn't speak Japanese and there were no foreigners and the English teachers didn't understand me and my family didn't speak English either. So it was a very full-on immersion into Japanese life. I had the opportunity to speak English about once every 2 months. And yeah, so it was a deep immersion into it. But then we went back as a family with children aged 5, 3, and 1. And we were there for 3 years. And my husband doesn't speak Japanese even after the 3 years that we were there. And I was having a fourth baby and we had to come home.
right. Okay.
So that was the catalyst, really, was he doesn't speak English. Sorry, he doesn't speak Japanese. And we've got a baby and we can't have a baby in Japan because we just
Yeah.
couldn't.
So very practical
So
reasons. Okay. The other thing about Japan that I can share is the concept of omotenashi. Uh, so because of my hospitality background, when I went to Japan, it was this innate sense of service that really struck me. Um, and the memory that I have of being in a kind of not a upscale place at all, but just a place where they served tea. And when the lady brought everything to the table, before she left, she just adjusted the teapot so that the handle was parallel to the teacup handle and the teaspoon was parallel as well, and then just moved the sugar like a centimeter closer to you to demonstrate that care. So I decided that I was going to write some training material around omotenashi in terms of customer service, heartfelt hospitality. And I was curious about the language. So I was told, oh yeah, well, the literal translation is hospitality. And but then a Japanese lady explained to me, she said, actually, that doesn't do it justice. And it's really about taking personal pleasure from paying attention to fine detail in delivering a service, which has stuck with me over so many years. And I just love that concept. And then I was curious about knowing more. And I remember there were core concepts within Omotenashi. So two, at least two that I remember. One was that it is not being servile in a service situation. It is providing the service to the other person because you want to and you can. Um, and then to remember that this moment between two people will never be repeated in exactly the same way, and to make it the very best that it can be. And that just fills my heart. It's just like such a cool way of viewing life. Um, yeah, so thanks for bringing those memories back.
No, you're very welcome. That second one there, where you're talking about that moment being for that moment alone, that is a kotowaza, a proverb that I absolutely love in Japanese, which is ichigo, ichie. And it talks about, when we left Japan, we had many, many very close friends, and it was very hard to leave them. And one of them told me about this particular proverb, ichigo, ichie. And it's really like that. It's about treasuring that moment, that relationship that you had with them, those special people that were part of your life for that particular moment in time. And that's what it was. And we take those thoughts, those memories and so on with us, and we can never go back to them. Even if we went back, they would be different. And if we try and hang on to them and uh, take take the people with us or anything like that, it won't work. It's for that moment, it's for that period of time, and it's shaped who we are as people, those experiences. So, and the other thing that was, as you were talking about that and the lining up of the things, you're talking there about a deep beauty when it comes to food, when it comes to food and eating, and even the dishes and so on that they use for serving food. There is such a care, there is such an appreciation of beauty. And I'm thinking back to the times that I did tea ceremony, and because I did tea ceremony for a year, learned how to do that. And part of the tea ceremony is the appreciation of the bowl, as you're admiring the bowl before you drink it, and then you've got the beauty on the inside of the bowl, and you've got the beauty on the outside of the bowl. And it's such a part of their culture.
Mm. So I think it might have been Japan Airlines, and I remember having a cup of tea, and when you had finished the tea, you could see the logo on the bottom inside of the cup. But if you hadn't finished your tea, you wouldn't have known that it was there. And it's that sense of I'm doing it because I want to, rather than it has to be seen kind of thing that is so special. Um, and again, not wanting to force it, but when you were talking about the memories and you're not able to replicate it, or you're not able, you need to take it for what it was. Um, there's something strengthening about that as well, if you can accept it in that way, because then you're not in the mindset of, oh, I wish we were still,
Yes.
it was beautiful. I'm privileged to have experienced that, and it strengthens me to remember.
Yes.
It's a very different approach, right? And that gives security.
Yes, it does. It does, which brings us back to our word of security.
Yeah.
Mm.
Now, in
Mm.
Values Jam,
Yeah.
there is an opportunity for you to ask a question. So, could I invite you to ask your own question about security using who, what, where, when, why, or how? And if you've got the answer immediately, then please share it in that way. Or if you'd prefer me to go first, then I can.
What is the biggest challenge to security that you see?
Ooh, um,
And I haven't got the answer.
I think the word fear comes to mind. So, I'm thinking about, I don't know why I'm going here. I'm thinking about America and schools and guns.
Mhm.
And, I heard a few months ago that somebody had seriously suggested that teachers should be given guns in case, there was something that they needed to deal with. And it struck me that in no way does that provide any security whatsoever. Um, and it is absolutely driven by fear. And the decision, in my view, is totally wrong, because what it's doing is accepting that something like that can happen in a setting like that. And I think um, a more security-led approach would be to say, what do we need to do to make sure that something like that not, well, never happens slash is mitigated as much as possible. Because it's only then that you can really feel secure, rather than, oh, the teacher's got a gun, so hope we're going to be okay. So that was a bit of a blurt, but that's an initial response to your question. What thoughts do you have?
That's interesting that you're talking about guns and teachers in the UK, sorry, in the US there. I was talking with some friends the other night about South African police and their experiences in different countries with police, and being the fear when you're approached by police. And they were talking about New Zealand police officers who aren't routinely armed, and just admiring the people skills, their way of defusing situations, because they haven't got guns to be able to fall back on. So they've had to learn a lot of other skills to be able to interact with people, to defuse situations, to calm people down, if you like, rather than just being able to resort to fear and
Mhm.
power and control to provide security, because it certainly didn't make them feel secure being near police officers in South Africa. There was certainly an element of fear there. Mm.
Interesting to hear what you were saying there about, because they didn't have guns to fall back on,
Yes.
and whether it's right or wrong, it it's it must affect your behavior. Yeah.
Mm.
So if you've got a gun, then
Mm.
I don't know, you're just going to be more predisposed to feel that it can be used. I suppose that's
Mm.
an obvious thing to say. And I guess the police, if we had a policeman on the call, maybe they would say, well, no, that's not true, because we're trained so well that it is absolutely the last resort and all the rest of it. So maybe it's more about, if you haven't got a gun, you're more resourceful about the skills that you draw on to deal with a situation. Um, so it's not just about the gun, it's about other things as well.
And I think it's about, when you're going back to the emotions driving 80% of the way that we are, making decisions and so on now, as opposed to the rational thoughts. She was very much talking about how she felt and the nervousness, the fear when dealing with police officers in South Africa versus oh, hi, and there's no problem, the relaxedness, the feeling that you are safe, that you are secure. The other thing that is affecting this is the bribery and corruption that is present in different societies that also lowers people's idea of security.
Yeah. This is it's interesting because like everybody, I suppose, I have different perceptions of different cards. And when you identified security as the card, I didn't feel a great deal of warmth towards it.
Interesting.
But having had the conversation, I'm kind of thinking that security is a friendlier, more important word than I'd previously considered it as, which is interesting in itself. Um, let's draw this values jam to a close. There's a final question to ask you, which is, what are you encouraged to do differently about security as a result of our conversation today?
I think for me, because people are the most important thing in the world to me, is to take some of the thoughts from today's conversation around security and relationships, psychological safety, if you like, and to reflect on that some more in terms of what that looks like for people in the organizations that I'm working with.
Okay. And if I was to push you a little bit further in terms of how are you going to take your first baby steps in that direction? Are you the sort of person that wants to now maybe spend a consolidated amount of time reflecting, or would you kind of start to put this into practice in certain situations, or what would it look like?
Yeah, I think for me, I do spend time reflecting, but I do that by looking for it. So as I see situations, I think, okay, that's interesting. That's affecting the security of that particular person. So I'm looking for it in situ in organizations, and that's how I'll be approaching it. So, in the workshops and things that I run, in the conversations that I have, that will be a lens that I'll be looking through as I'm reflecting on different relationships and what's happening, in leadership development and so on, and what's the safety, if you like, the psychological safety of people as a result of the conversation today. So,
Okay.
what
And
about you?
yeah, so I've got a request actually, which might not be to do with security, but I'd love you to send me that proverb that you mentioned so that I
Yeah.
can look it up and look into that a bit. Um, I've just started a customer experience development program with a client, and a three different regions, the senior leaders. And part of that project is for them now to create impact plans that they're going to implement between now and they're going to present on the impact in early February. And I don't think we've given enough focus to how their psychological safety and sense of security is going to allow them to create the most positive impact within their organization. So we've got a call with them on the 22nd of October. So I'm going to add that to the agenda.
Mm.
If not explicitly, then to include it in the discussion. So that's been really, really helpful.
Mm. Mm.
Okay,
And
so sorry, go
I
on.
think the other thing is, as I'm creating culture canvases and so on using the cards, I think that leads into providing that security for people as well. Yeah, it's definitely going to be something more that I reflect on. Thank you so much for this conversation.
All right, thanks, Cathy. You're a qualified values jammer.
Yes.
I hope you feel secure about that.
Yeah, I do. Totally secure.
Cheers.
Thanks so
Bye.
much. Lovely to meet you.